Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, dear members of the audience, to this first cyber panel on space law in the 2020 ASIL annual meeting. My name is Isabella Vassilo-Georgi, and I will be moderating this session. Which Way to the Stars? Challenges to Regulation of New Space Activities is the title of this session, which seeks to explore if and how a plethora of different space actors and interests could be accommodated in a singular form. Together with our distinguished speakers, who I will introduce shortly, we will discuss areas of potential application of such an arrangement, possibilities, and obstacles. You can find the full description of the session in the annual meeting program. At this moment, I wish to thank ASIL and the members of this year's program committee for including this panel in the annual program. I would also like to thank Intersentia Publishing for their kind sponsorship of this panel. Last but not least, since this is the first cyber edition of the annual meeting, thank you all to the ASIL technical team for your continued support. The topic under discussion is based on my doctoral dissertation, which I defended in 2017 at the Institute of Air and Space Law at McGill University. At this point, I would also like to state that both the doctoral dissertation as well as my presence here today at the annual meeting are in my personal capacity, and under no circumstances do they reflect the official position, view, or opinion of the United Nations, which is my current employer, regarding the topics under discussion. Now, together with me today, I have the great pleasure and honor to have three dear colleagues and friends and great space enthusiasts from across the world. We would have normally gathered in Washington, D.C., but we're scattered all over the world. So starting from the furthest away and moving to the closest to this shore, allow me to introduce first Dr. Yuri Takaya Umehara, who is a visiting researcher at the Institute of Future Initiatives of the University of Tokyo in Japan, who is working on academic projects related to space law and policy in terms of space security, space resource exploitation, and space debris management. Yuri obtained her LLM from the Institute of Air and Space Law of Leiden University, our perpetual competitors, at McGill. The university is in the Netherlands, of course, and her PhD from the Institute of Telecommunication and Space Law, IDEST, in Paris 11 in France. Here, she's also had an internship experience at the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, USA, where she focused on legal aspects of global satellite navigation systems. And her dissertation theme was space security and international law. Welcome, Yuri. Next is Dr. Goyu Wang, who is an associate professor and the dean of the Academy of Air, Space Policy and Law in Beijing Institute of Technology. Goyu also serves as the deputy director of the Chinese National Space Administration, the Space Law Center, since 2017. He's a legal counselor in space law for the Chinese National Space Administration in the Lunar Exploration and Space Project Center. He's a member of the advisory committee of the Security World Foundation since 2020. Goyu also holds a doctoral degree in law and economics, and he's the delegate of China before the legal subcommittee of the United Nations Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space since 2012. Welcome, Goyu.
Thank you.
Last but not least, I have Dr. Gerardine Goa-Escolar, who is the first secretary of the Permanent Bureau of the Hague Conference on Private International Law. Gerardine is concurrently an adjunct associate professor at the Faculty of Law at the National University of Singapore, where she teaches international space law and international humanitarian law. Gerardine holds a doctorate from Leiden University as well, and an LLM in public international law from the University College London. She has served as a legal officer in the International Court of Justice and the Iran-United States Claims Tribunal in the past, and has been the recipient of multiple awards and scholarships for her academic work. I actually feel intimidated, but also extremely honored to be in your presence, dear friends. I think we will have a great discussion moving forward, so I think we should start immediately. So I'll throw in the first question, starting with Yuri as the first person to speak. So one of the key words in recent space law literature is new space activities. We also have it in the program description. This term seems to encompass activities relating to the exploitation of space natural resources, space debris mitigation, and others. Do you agree with the use of this term? And what do you understand when people use this term? Are we really talking about new activities or about new space? So Yuri, over to you.
Thank you, Isabella. So let me start from the question one. Although we often hear the term new space or new space activities in the context of the commercial uses of outer space in recent years, they are not legally defined and their concepts are different. The term simply new space has been used since the 1980s when private entities started space activities for business by using satellite-based applications. So their involvement in space was described as the commercialization of outer space. On the other hand, the term new space activities we talk now are space business that provide access to space at a low price in a short time range or making a new business model with private investment. For example, at the launching activities, some of the providers use reusable space vehicles like a SpaceX or Blue Origins, and others use small launcher or conduct air launch by using a combination of a small launcher and aircraft. Another example is a business related to space resources. For example, the former Planetary Resources Incorporation created a ranking list of asteroids known as AstroRank that shows which asteroid is attractive to investors. Although after major US companies such as the planetary resources or deep space industry were taken over by other companies, but issues related to space resources remain, and they enter into the context of the manned space missions for the Moon and Mars. Thus, the term new space activities represents emerging private entities with better service at a low cost, low price, although their concepts are according to Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, space activities by private entities require authorization and continuous supervision by states who are responsible for their activities. From this point of view, the term new space activities means the activities by non-state actors and nothing particular changed or new thing is emerging in the field of space activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuri. So Jerry, over to you with the same question about new space activities.
Thank you, Isabella. Well, first, welcome to everyone as well. I will have to repeat what my moderator just said, and any opinions that I give in the course of this recording are entirely my own and do not implicate the institutions with which I'm affiliated. Turning quite quickly to the question, what's in the name, isn't it? To my mind, terms like new space, or as some use it, democratized space, these terms are descriptive of a global movement in the development of better, faster, cheaper access to space. And some of them have objectives which are distinct from the more conventional government-driven activities that have historically tended to concentrate on scientific, political, or security aspects. So then the question, of course, arises, what exactly is new about this? The physical space is the same. So perhaps there's some legal debate about the delimitation of outer space from airspace, but that discussion has not abated in the preceding decade, and it has not impeded technological innovation or the practical implementation of legal regulations. Which then begs the question, as Isabella says, are the activities that new? And I think my answer to that is, well, not very specifically. Some of the activities are newish, such as the capture and use of space-based resources, on-orbit servicing, such as refueling, and even rendezvous and proximity operations. And some of the activities, however, can't actually possibly be classified as new because they involve launch, satellite deployment, even human spaceflight, which are things that we have been doing for decades. Now, of course, SpaceX stirred global excitement with the successful launch to the International Space Station of astronauts Robert Behnken and Douglas Hurley. But in and of itself, the launch of humans into outer space isn't a new activity. Now, as of this recording, last Saturday, the 13th of June 2020, SpaceX successfully launched its 9th Starlink mission, which carried 58 Starlink satellites and 3 of Planet's SkySats. And the actual launch and deployment of these satellites are also not new activities. But therein lies the rub, because therein lies something new. There is a new stakeholder in the driving seat, which is a commercial operator that procured the launch of humans into outer space. There is a new technology, a reusable launch vehicle that is being deployed for human space flight. There is a new objective, commercial viability, as 2 commercial operators start to cooperate. And there is a new application for the existing technology, such as mega constellations of satellites, that is being built. So when we look at the question of what new space is and we ask what exactly is new, to my mind, it is a new theater with new conditions. And the rules of the playbook may have to be adapted to function in this new theater. So it isn't really a matter of whether people agree with the use of the term new space, but really I think it will turn on having a coherent and universal use and understanding of both the taxonomy and the terminology. So I think there's a thought that I have here is that in the tug of something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue, there are a few things that maybe lawyers would need to keep in mind when we talk about new space. The first is that something old need not be abandoned in the rush to create new laws for a new theater. A lot of what is considered new activities and new space activities could benefit from the adaptation of the something old. So the Lex Mercantil, the public international law framework, the UN space law treaties, Lex Contractus, and other much more traditional legal fields and principles. There is nothing wrong with tried and true principles being the something borrowed for new space. Now, the something new of the new space industry will, of course, require the acknowledgement of evolving characters of stakeholders and activities, and it will also require creativity and innovation. But then there is the something blue, which is that ultimately the ongoing and further development of space technology and applications would benefit from concretizing blue sky ideas or solutions in the law that would be completely novel and unique from anything that has come before. I hope that answers the question, Isabella.
Great, and thank you so much for all this distinguishing of what is new and what we can interpret or understand as new and what we can reuse or reinvent, if you would. Goyu, do you agree with Jerry's approach?
Yeah, I cannot agree more. But let me just share my views on the questions in the first part. So first, about the use of the term new space activities. Of course, we are facing so many kinds of so-called new space activities. However, personally, still, I think the term should be used carefully, in particular when the use of it is associated with the assertions for new rules, or as Jerry said, new conditions, right? So, because as Professor Carl Christo said before, use both old and new would result in misuses. So I believe that this axiom also applies in the use of the term new space activities, in particularly when talking about the necessity to have new space law. So the question to be considered carefully here is whether new space activity would definitely lead to an amendment of the existing space treaties or a discussion about new rules, new treaties. I think it's not necessarily the case. It should be examined according to the specific circumstances, right? So second, about my understandings of the what is new space activity. So comparing with old space activity, new could be categorized in the development of, we say, subjects, objects, and contents of space activities. So, which again might affect the explanations of old space law or promote the development of new space law. So, short briefly speaking, new subjects could be understood as we say, more and more private sectors, companies in space. Also, as what is also happening in China, and new objects could be observed, new targets to be explored, used, or even exploited. For instance, like dark matter in the universe and the gravitational wave or neutral resources on celestial bodies. And then new contents refers to all kinds of new space applications, space use, space mission, most of which were driven by new space technologies. For instance, like space tourism, 3D printing, outer space, CubeSat and launching, revolution, large site constellation, orbit servicing, active debris removal, space mining, and even new Earth object defense. We say planetary defense. So last point as to new space, or no matter just the two words, put it in two words, new space, or put it in one word, new space. On one side, the new space activity and new space are real. However, on the other side, I see them in different ways. New space activity is objective existence, no matter you like it or not. It is there, but new space is a subjective description, which could be elaborated or constructed in different ways by different stakeholders. For instance, for a private sector, new space might mean new profit model or new partnership with the government or military. And for a diplomat or policymaker, new space might indicate new space negotiation, initiative, new space policies or politics, or even new space order. Right. So, and for an international lawyer or space lawyer, it might trigger new perspectives in Lex Lata or Lex Ferenda. So, new space is broader for me than new space activities. It also has the implications in respect of space economy, space and society, space diplomacy, space politics, space law, and even space ecosystem. So it always calls for a new concept of a regime in the process of the formulation of a new space order. For instance, like we know LTS, STM, space global governance, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Goyu. I think this is actually a great segue to our next question, because I want to delve into deeper a little bit into what can bring together all these new space activities that each one of you mentioned. So the core issue of this panel is space traffic management. All the space activities involve movement through, in, and out of outer space. So I'm wondering, do you consider that this is a technical matter that can be resolved with semi-formal or just informal technical cooperation between states, or is it a predominantly political issue? And if it is the latter, is an international organization dedicated to space traffic management a viable option, for instance? Jerry, what do you think?
Thank you, Isabella. I think when we get back to the issue of trying to get greater access to space, we're talking about the greater access to space with a philosophy of better, cheaper, faster. Now, that means that a larger swath of actors are participating in space activities today than ever before. That's a great thing because it brings our species closer to the goal of the use and exploration of outer space for the common benefit of humanity. But it comes with its own challenges. So among the challenges that we talk about in space traffic management, of course, is the condition of the outer space environment, the increase of orbital debris. Increased operation also means that these cooperation and operations in outer space, rather, would need to be coordinated. And not just coordinated, but coordinated among a very diverse and varied group of stakeholders. Now, this also means that new policies, new implementing regulations, standards, licensing, all of that has to be considered in one package. So I don't think it is as cut and dried as whether this topic is a predominantly political or mainly technical issue. I think there certainly are technical issues that should be discussed and resolved by technical experts, but I think we would be very naive to exclude politics from the discussion. So I think when we discuss the management of space traffic, it comes from the single premise that what binds all these activities together, whether they are Earth focused or they're space based, is that it's in a certain geographic location. It's in outer space. And then I think that there are three major technical, policy, and legal issues which are intertwined in this discussion. The first one I think we've touched on already. And the first is that the existing system in place, including what we call old space, so the things that are under the auspices of the United Nations, the principles relating to registration, jurisdiction, and control liability, we have to grapple with the fact that this existing system is slowly proving inadequate for this new theater of space activities. And then the question is, what do we do about it going forward? Now, the space traffic management issue wants to ensure safety, scalability, interoperability, and future proofing. And so for that, we then move to the second group of intertwined issues, which is that space traffic management is intertwined not just with air traffic management, because we're born of this earth and we need to get through the air in our atmosphere to get to outer space. But I think one of the most interesting aspects at the moment is the work that's being carried out on unmanned traffic management, or UTM. Now, of course, it involves quite a few of the same players. Airbus, for example, is involved with this, the International Civil Aviation Organization, the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. Now, this is all rooted in a project to enable future digital traffic management, which future-proofs the question of space traffic management. And this allows us to create a blueprint for moving forward with future traffic management, in particular in the setting that we're speaking of. So thirdly, I think the environmental issues that are a reality, and we're going to have to face the reality of the environment of outer space that we deal with, which is that obviously it's hazardous, but the issue also takes the form of orbital debris. Now, interestingly, from an international law perspective, we run up always against the historical issue that international space law predates the coalescence of the body of international legal norms that protect the environment. So it's very unsurprising, I think, that the space law core treaties do not incorporate specific substantive legal principles on protecting, preserving, remedying the outer space environment. But regardless, it is important to consider the environment of the outer space activities in which we conduct, and how to tie all that into one coherent space management system. Now, when it comes to space objects that we have still control over, so we still have an ACS that works, we can move this object around, it really is a matter of coordination. And then there are various different schemes on how this could be done. ICAO itself has come up with certain topics that they have said are interesting and important for them, because like it or not, the truth is, global air traffic management and space traffic, they do collide, at least in the airspace. There is a great risk for aviation due to space operations, and it is something that we need to think about when we also talk about space management. The International Academy of Astronautics, I think back in 2006, already defined space traffic management as a set of regulatory rules to ensure safe access to outer space, safe operations in outer space, and safe return from outer space. And so the basis of this is to just make sure that there's a comprehensive traffic regime that can be regulated, that can be adapted to make sure that the entire endeavor is a safe one. Now, you are probably all very well aware of the different public international law rules in the 1967 Outer Space Treaty that Yuri has mentioned, and of course, all the different domestic laws and regulations. And I think we would also then be remiss to not to mention the issues that have come up when we're talking about new uses of outer space, with new space activities and actors and technical challenges. Now, there are different ways of thinking about it. There are different phases of a space mission: launch, in orbit, post-mission, re-entry. There are different kinds of space mission, crewed, uncrewed. There are different concepts as well, and different options for space traffic management. There is the ICAO concept, there's the ITU, or the International Telecommunications Union concept. But all of this generally tends to talk about a legal framework, which I think, as Isabella asked, does seem to veer towards the political. I think there is nothing wrong in thinking about it as an international organization, but then that organization needs to be quite careful to also interact and engage with the stakeholders actually in the space. So it can't be a purely traditional international organization that only recognizes states. It needs to be an interagency type of organization. It also needs to recognize that private actors and other entities are involved. And there actually, it brings to mind the I think, cooperation between the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, USA, and ICAO. So they've got a lot of conversation back and forth. And I think that will actually move quite forward. So I think those are the things that we have to consider, but I'd be curious what my other panelists would think. Thanks, Isabella.
Sure, go you.
Okay, thank you. Hold on a second, please. So first, just directly answer the question. I think the space traffic management is neither a self-contained technical system nor political system. While international STM regime could not be achieved without technical support, technical cooperation, according to just like Jerry said, and the consensus of a political will. On the other hand, I like to share with some of my views about the very basic characteristics of STM with all of you. Just the 4 points. So the first one, STM is a systematic existence, which includes technical, political, and legal factors, and could be achieved in two dimensions, national and international. That's the first mark. The second one, STM is different ways, long-term sustainability, LTS, space global governance. STM is a method to preserve and protect LTS. However, STM is not objective per se. Thus, it's different ways LTS. Besides, as I mentioned, it has just both national and international dimensions. Thus, it's not identical with we say space global governance or international space governance. So third, a system of STM should contain 4 aspects, respectively. The first one, STM relations, which consists of subject, object, and contents of the STM. Second, tools for STM. For instance, like regulations, code, technical standards, procedural requirements. And third, approach for STM. Is it a self-management or spontaneous management model, which is market-oriented or to be triggered by government demand, international demand, and led by one state or several states or any international organization? So if the time allowed, at the end of this, I would like to talk a little bit about it. And for the objective of STM. So the last point about the character of STM, in the international dimension, space traffic governance is a better term than space traffic management, personally, in that comparing with the term management, the governance has more connotations to highlight facing the common challenges, common threats, and seeking for a solution together. However, management, at least in Chinese, is more or less indicates to be led by one leader or one platform, which is always based on sovereignty or power. So no matter the manager or the one to be managed is not in an even position. So STM is more suitable to use as a domestic concept, no problem. Since the government has powers, authority to require the space actors under its jurisdiction and control to do or not to do anything. Besides, the concept of space traffic governance is also applicable in domestic system, just like environment governance. So maybe the international community is encouraged to use and discuss the term of STG instead of STM. Thank you.
That is actually a great point, and I think it brings a very interesting cultural perspective into the discussion that's not always seen when we, read literature that's mostly written from Western educated authors, if I may put it this way. Yuri, do you share the views of Goyu and Jerry on this matter?
Yes. Yes, I agree with Jerry and Goyu, especially in terms of technical support STM needs. And let me start my opinion that STM has become a key issue not only for states anymore or for private entities, but also for individuals who use satellite-based application or systems. And it entered into the context of the international law already, beyond technical cooperation or political manner. For example, SDM has been an agenda item for scientific and technological subcommittee of UN COPUS for a long time, but it shifted to legal subcommittee since 2017, and EU created the building blocks of European approach to SDM that provides comprehensive rules. In practice, from a space law perspective, building an international regulatory framework for SDM requires clarification of the existing obligations imposed by the Outer Space Treaty, such as registration, notification, information sharing, liability, and so on. And the establishment of SDM serves as transparency and confidence building measures. So our question is whether or not such a process or making SDM use a treaty. As to the possibility of establishing an international organization, it depends on what kind of multilateral SDM we would like to build in future. International platform or annual conference for reviewing SDM, which does not need a treaty, or international organization like ICAO or ITU, which requires a treaty. However, as you know, due to the consensus principle taken by UN COPUS, making a new treaty is not so easy. On the other hand, we can pay attention to some new updates which was made by US. Last year, US launched the Presidential Space Directive 3 that prioritizes that's related to the space traffic management that prioritizes the use of space situational awareness and clarified the national security interest or consideration, and it aimed to promote space safety standards and best practice across the international community. It also addresses space debris mitigation guidelines, standards, and political policies should be enforced domestically and adopted internationally. So the scope of SDM has extended to include SSA, space debris, and national security interests now. So in my opinion, it might be a good idea to also see a good example, which starts from a small UN office, like a preparatory commission for the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization that used remote sensing data for detecting nuclear tests, even the treaty itself is not enforced yet. So it's kind of a confusion, sorry. But in my opinion, the more STM deals with the data of functional space objects and space debris, the more we need a multilateral or global STM scheme based on a combination of the Outer Space Treaty and existing soft law related. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuri. And I actually really like your question about what kind of multilateral treaty are we looking into. Is it a treaty-based body or not a treaty-based body? I also like how you pointed to national developments, and it's true that since the last annual meeting, we have had a year that was rich in space-related developments. In addition to what you mentioned, we also had the unveiling of the US Space Force, for instance, and similarly announcements from other states of setting up equivalent or similar space military divisions in their national armies. So there has been a reinvigoration of the whole discussion of militarization of outer space. So the question then is for space traffic management or governance, as Go you mentioned before, what role, if any, does the military play in this situation? So Go you, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, thank you. So as to me, the question could be further understood as what is the relationship between the governance of military space activities or military use of outer space with STM. So that's why I argued, I use the phrase governance, just now. And I like to focus on the legal perspective in respect of this. Before that, it's necessary to have a general understanding about the main legal principle regarding military in space law, which is titled Peaceful Use Principle. This principle is enshrined in Article 4 of the Space Treaty, which is, as a matter of fact, is limitedly peaceful use principle, since it does not prohibit all military space activities, but just some of them. Inter alia, it only bans the placement of nuclear weapons and the weapon of mass destruction in space without mentioning conventional weapons. It forbids the establishment of military bases, installations, and fortifications, the testing of any weapon, and the conduct of military maneuvers on celestial body. However, it does not expressly ban other kinds of military activities on celestial bodies or military use of celestial bodies. For instance, military use of space resources, or a civilian or using civilian or commercial facilities on the moon to support military communication in space missions. Although Article 4 also stipulates the moon and other celestial bodies shall be used exclusively for peaceful purpose, it is still under debate whether it means full non-militarization of celestial bodies. But which is clear that most of the military space activities relating space are not expressly banned, such as asset test, laser dazzling, interference with GNSS or telecommunication, or even the TT&C system through jamming, spoofing, and other cyber means, or co-orbit operations such as ADR or the reverse proximity operation RPO. That's the reason to talk a little bit about the military use of outer space in Laxalada is that there might be new demands increasing about governance of military space activities, and which must be tightly associated with STM regime in future. This acknowledgement is necessary for us to better understand our question from a legal perspective. So I like to share my views on the relationship between the governance of military space activities with STM. First, from a domestic perspective, military space activity is definitely part of national space traffic management. And in the context of international space governance, military space activity is, of course, should also be put in the framework of STM. But as I argued before, from international level, space traffic governance is a better and more acceptable term than STM, in particular in the case of military space traffic. And second, when talking about traffic governance over military space activities, it could be related to the arms control in space or prevention of arms race in outer space. Paris like to forbidden certain vehicles to pass through city roads in traffic management on ground. Certain weapons have been banned to place in space. And we know China, Russia, the proposal PPWT further suggests to ban the placement of all kinds of weapons in space. Moreover, in the context of military space traffic governance, more and more discussions have been taken about the legal boundary or legality of military space behaviors, in particular in orbit operations, like I just mentioned, jamming, spoofing, approaching, and accompany flights, and so on. Third, if STM or STG were understood in a more comprehensive way, it could even be in connection with the law of use of force and international humanitarian law, HL. The STM scenario in this case could be about legal requirements in the exercise of self-defense right in space and in space war, which of course should be the last picture we would like to see. At this stage, it might not be right time to officially for the states to go deep in the discussion of the law of use of force or the application of HL in space, because there are still so many strong opinions which are worrying such discussion would stimulate or even pave the way for further militarization or weaponization of outer space. So, in the word, military space activity could also be the target of space traffic management. and would be adjusted by 4 categories of rules, namely the law of arms control, law of military space operation, law of use of force, and the law of armed conflicts, ATL. These rules are also part of the legal basis of international regime of STM, or Space Traffic Governance, STG, in future. Thank you.
Thank you, Goyu. Yuri, I will turn to you for a follow-up on this question.
Thank you. So, as I slightly touched on already, the scope STM is extended to include national security interests in the name of ensuring safety in outer space. So that would use data obtained from space situational awareness, which fall in the military domain. For example, US now set up a civil STM to differentiate from military STM. So to some extent, the military would be involved in establishing and operating STM. In this respect, we see an example that Japan and the US government concluded the SSA sharing agreement in 2013. A good aspect of building a multilateral STM scheme is that it serves as a transparency and confidence building measures that identify any collisions or destruction of a space object in Earth orbit that might deter ASAT tests or the use of force in outer space. Considering the difficulty of defining space weapons and delimiting outer space from airspace, the use of STM system makes it feasible to verify treaty compliance of the Outer Space Treaty that prohibit the placement of weapons of mass destruction in Earth orbit under Article 4, and any harmful interference to other states' activities under Article 9, as well as proving any faults of launching states in the case of damage caused in outer space in terms of liability. Thus, the involvement of the military in STM is not exceptional, and we should talk about it. But that does not necessarily lead to the militarization of outer space. We would see military cooperation for STM, but it does not directly lead to the militarization of outer space. So it has the possibility to strengthen the implementation of the Outer Space Treaty that aims for absolute or exclusive peaceful uses of outer space. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuri. And I like this last point that you raised, the strengthening of the existing legal framework, because this is the most excellent introduction to my last question to you all today. As you know, this year's overarching theme for the annual meeting is the promise of international law. And as you mentioned just before, the last thing we want to see, of course, is Star Wars, but not of the fun and entertaining variety to occur. However, in 2020, we have seen a polarization of actions with respect to multilateralism in general. On the one hand, for instance, we see strong tendencies of withdrawal from multilateral fora and different instruments. And on the other hand, we hear voices that urge for a stronger multilateral cooperation. And I think, Yuri, you might be one of them. So how do you think that this translates to the space law environment? And since it's a very recent development, I cannot help but ask, what do you think the Artemis Accords, for instance, represent in this development that we have observed? So, Yuri, I will start with you.
Thank you, Isabella. Later, I will touch on the Artemis Accord. But first, let me start from the voices raised in terms of exploitation of natural resources in outer space. In other words, space resources. It's related to the question, answer to this question. A few states like the US and Luxembourg, and in near future Japan also, is thinking to they enacted their national space legislation to permit private entities to own space resources. The enactment raised the controversy whether or not their breach the principle of non-appropriation. Those states deny their intention to appropriate celestial bodies, but to use space resources for commercial purposes and express their will to observe international obligation. In theory, from the perspective of public international law, Article 27 of the Vienna Convention on the Law of the Treaties of 1969 prohibits a state party to invoke its internal law as a justification for its failure to perform a treaty. Then, there are Special Resources Acts do not impact on legal conflicts, solving legal conflicts with the other states. However, their enactment shapes a risk that the first come, first served rule might be applied to the exploitation of space resources. In this respect, we have a good model of multilateral cooperation such as ITU and International Seabed Agency. In particular, ISA is a good example that is an autonomous organization having 168 members established under the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and the 1998 Agreement. It coordinates the use of mineral resources in deep seabed, where has the same legal status as outer space, which is res communis. On the other hand, now Artemis Accord, raised from the US Artemis programs, reminds me of the Intergovernmental Agreement for International Space Station, which is bilateral and includes the principles necessary for achieving one space mission. If many states consider Artemis Accord, if many states conclude Artemis Accords with the US, it might prove that sharing the same vision or same mission is a key factor for making a new treaty. In sum, if we seek for a specific scheme for benefit sharing among states that require coordination mechanisms, it is still possible to update the Outer Space Treaty by additional protocol agreements, even though making a new treaty is not easy. But this is a way we can make Outer Space Treaty alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuri. Go you.
First, I think we're lucky that it's not the case in space. At least there's no signs to show any state is ready to withdraw from, the UN 5 space treaties. But on the other hand, we have to face directly to the challenges in space domain, which are brought by the negative atmosphere in international relations or politics as a whole. Second, accept different political positions and concerns. States might also have different understanding standing points about the interpretation of existing space treaties, space law, and the formulation of new space treaties, because they might be at different stages of the development of space technology and space missions. Thus, it's still difficult to achieve significant consensus on some fundamental topics, as some of them mentioned by Yuri. What is the legal character of space and its resources? We hear some voices to say, no, space is not global common. Personally, I agree with that, but obviously it's lacking of international, the recognition or consensus on that. And whether the common heritage of mankind, the CHM principle, is international customary law, and whether and how it will apply in space. Because I heard many people, including Yuri, you just mentioned that the seabed regime could be maybe taken as references in space. But I personally, I don't think we should be very careful about that, because that regime or mechanism based on the CHM theory or concept in maritime law, which always indicates, okay, the resources on the seabed is common property of mankind. So I don't think it has the same meaning in even the Moon Agreement or in space law about the definition or concept of CHM. Okay, so and then what is the acceptable and efficient way out in respect of STM or Paris is also another challenge, other challenges. And third, in general, I'm still optimistic to development of international law, including space law. I believe keep going is still the mainstream of it, and any standstill or even go backwards is just temporary and transitory. After all, the essence of governance of space is international endeavor, no matter from a macro perspective like STM or STG or LTS, or a very specific perspective like the NU defense or um, ADR. The common goal would never be achieved without international cooperation. So, and inevitably, international space rules making would be part of it. Thank you. I stop here.
Jerry, do you also agree in forward-thinking space law momentum?
Thanks, Isabella. I think adding my voice to those of optimism of my fellow panelists, I think maybe space and space law attracts a certain kind of optimism. And all my colleagues, I think, are very much focused on internationalism, which is basically how the whole field actually, is based. I think the news of the death of multilateralism is greatly exaggerated. I think in my experience, I cannot categorically say that there is a tendency to withdraw from multilateralism, because even if you look to the behavior of governments and their states, we find that the withdrawal from one specific multilateral framework tends to precede a flurry of activity to create more other diverse bilateral relationships, all of which will impact the other. And I think that kind of, it's an idea that I have, which kind of also is something that Yuri has mentioned. When we speak of multilateralism, the traditional way of thinking about it is there is a framework treaty. People sign up to that framework treaty and you make a multilateral kind of a system that way. But maybe there's a new way of doing multilateralism that would work. Maybe it would be that one more forward-thinking state or one more advanced in that particular area would come up with something that they think would be a good principle, and people sign up to it, a bit like how the space station in the end was built. And there you build a community of like-minded people. If we want to then take it back to the traditional public international law principles, that could slowly build, not even a consensus, but just a crystallization of norms that with consistent and widespread state practice, and then the requisite opinion juris could one day become custom. But I think, in everyone's mind, I think that everyone understands that no entity, no state is one isolated or is an island. And to the contrary, in my daily job, I've had the privilege in the past year, just in the last year, of a front row seat and getting my hands dirty in the final negotiations and adoption of a multilateral treaty. And that treaty provides a mechanism for foreign states to agree to recognize other jurisdictions' cases. I think that shows us that people are still willing to come to the table and still to discuss. And we see that still, especially in the space arena. So when you're looking at the US Air Force, for example, they're the world's largest provider of information for space situational awareness, SSA. So they actually provide that information, GPS, for example, another, the global positioning system. There are some aspects of that which may not be totally civil, but we have a lot of civil applications on a global basis. And I think in particular that the very unusual circumstances that have led to this panel being presented in this format. So very unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic, but then the responses to that have shown us that multilateralism is here to stay, because we cannot deal with all of these issues coming up on an individual basis. We are one species, and we need to look at space law, the space environment, international law from that perspective. So I think we might have a different form of multilateralism going forward, but I think it's necessary for the long-term sustainability of space activities.
Excellent. I actually, it feels comforting to hear from all three of you your belief in multilateralism, which I absolutely share. It also feels comforting to see how we can explore different options of multilateralism that may start from a bilateral effort. And Yuri's reference to the IGA agreement for the International Space Station is what came to my mind as one of the latest multilateral efforts for space lawmaking, when everyone was saying that the space treaty era had died. I do not share that premise. So I think we may still have a lot more to see. So once again, fellow panelists, I want to thank you so much for being here with me today to discuss all of those issues, and I want to thank all of you for attending this panel. We wish we had audience with us, but COVID did not allow this. Hopefully, we will see you again in Washington, D.C. in 2021. And in the meantime, our thanks go out to ASIL for hosting the panel and to Intersensia Publishing for sponsoring it. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.